A freighter carrying a crew of 29 disappeared on Lake Superior during a severe storm last night, and so far, no survivors have been found. The freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves. Rebecca Bell has the story.
In the area where the Fitzgerald went down, a sister ship joined the search, but so far all that was found was an oil slick, life jackets, and an empty lifeboat. There was no sign of the 29 men aboard. Officials say the freighter was fighting gale winds and 25-foot waves. The Fitzgerald left the Burlington Northern Docks here at Superior, Wisconsin, Sunday afternoon with a cargo of more than 26,000 tons of taconite ore pellets. She was bound for Detroit. The huge freighter was last heard from shortly after 7 o'clock last night when one of its officers radioed a nearby steamer to say the Fitzgerald was taking on water and had lost 2 hatch covers. Shortly after that, the freighter disappeared.
Well, it's purely speculation, but with a following sea like that, you would consider the possibility of the ship broaching to and possibly capsizing, or else just breaking in half and splitting apart.
This week's 50th anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald disaster has sent me down a whole series of different trains of thought. I've watched a lot of things, I've read a lot of things. I certainly know more about the technical details of the event and the personal details of the men who were lost than I did 48 hours ago, but there's a particular phrase that I want to focus on in opening this video. The Titanic of the Great Lakes. That's the term that's now the common vernacular shorthand for referring to the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is interesting because there is not a lot of surface level commonality between the two events. First and most obviously, there was never any mystery about what happened with the Titanic. She collided with an iceberg, it opened up more of her watertight compartments than she was able to withstand, and she went down by the head in a matter of about 2.5 hours. Our entire understanding of the event is based on the eyewitness testimony of over 700 survivors. If there was ever any mystery, it was in the exact location of the wreck on the Atlantic seafloor and whether she broke in two before she went down, and Bob Ballard answered both of those questions in 1985. With the Edmund Fitzgerald, everybody died. There were no survivors. There are still competing theories about the series of events and the confluence of circumstances that sent her to the bottom of Lake Superior. One was an ocean-going passenger liner. The other was a Great Lakes ore freighter. There's no commonality there. Some of the most famous people in the world perished in the Titanic disaster, but the crewmen of the Edmund Fitzgerald were totally anonymous, except, of course, to the people who knew and loved them. If the two events are associated, it is in the extent to which they have implanted themselves in the popular consciousness and the cultural memory. And in both cases, that might be largely because of a song. If you hear a man with a violin play the opening strains of Nearer My God to Thee, you are going to think of Wallace Hartley and his band playing their final number moments before they would all perish on the boat deck of the rapidly sinking RMS Titanic. If you say otherwise, you're lying. And likewise, if I picked up an acoustic guitar right now, capo on the 2nd fret, and I played an A chord and then an E minor and then a G and a D and back to an A, in the style of an Irish funeral dirge, you would think of the Edmund Fitzgerald disaster and a certain Gordon Lightfoot song. It is Thursday, the 13th of November. This is Curmudgeon's Corner. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I still feel kind of bad that I did a parody of a Gordon Lightfoot song, and then he died like the very next week. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to Curmudgeon's Corner. Let's take a moment to dispel, while we are here, one of the stupidest controversies about the Titanic before we proceed any further. People are still arguing, and they have been arguing ever since the 18th of April 1912, when RMS Carpathia pulled into New York Harbor carrying the Titanic survivors over what the last song was that the band played before the ship went down. Most of the English survivors insisted that the song was Nearer My God to Thee. Many of the American survivors maintained it was a popular song of the period called Autumn. Hat tip to Lady Curmudgeon. But there's no controversy here, or at least there shouldn't be. You're talking about different sets of lyrics that are set to the same melody. Both sides are correct. In other words, if you were from England, you would have recognized it as a religious hymn about dying and going to meet one's maker. If you were from America, you would more likely recognize it as a song about yearning for a lost love. If you are Wallace Hartley, the band leader, recognizing that all the lifeboats are already away and the water is up to your ankles and you and everyone around you is about to die a fairly horrible death and you've only got time for one more number, it stands to reason that he intended to play the English religious hymn and not the American love ballad. And speaking of that, did you know that's why we refer to songs as numbers? Because of ocean liner bands from the Edwardian period? You see, each cruise line had its own booklet of repertoire that its musicians were expected to know, so when you went to see the band perform, each audience member would be handed a copy of the booklet, and it became common practice for the band to finish playing a song, and then the band leader would say, "Okay, folks, which number do you want to hear next?" And the musicians weren't just expected to know how to play each song, they were also expected to know which number was associated with each song. So when someone in the audience yelled out, 63, the band leader would say, "Okay, number 63, here it comes, and a 1, 2, 3, 4, and off you go. So there's your totally useless bit of knowledge for the day. You're welcome. But back to the Edmund Fitzgerald, since that's the anniversary we are here to talk about. I've heard a few people say that the event wouldn't have made the same imprint on the popular consciousness and the cultural memory without the Gordon Lightfoot song, and I guess, objectively speaking, that's probably true, but in my own case, personally, it's really not. In fact, I have less of a nostalgic attachment to that song than I probably should have. It comes out when I'm, 2 years old? It's a #1 hit in Canada, #2 in the US. I mean, I recall the melody and a few snippets of the words, but I had to go and listen to it a few times this morning in order to remember it in its entirety. There are other songs from that period that made a much bigger imprint on my consciousness than that one did, though I can't say why that is. But I do recall always being interested in the mystery of the actual event. Is that because the grown-ups told me about it, because it was still in the forefront of their consciousness, because of the Lightfoot song? That is certainly possible, although I can't say for sure. It's a hell of a great song, though. And I was interested to learn just this morning, hat tip to Lore Lodge, that the release take was the first take that the band ever recorded. That was the dry run. Lightfoot didn't think the song was finished yet, wasn't sure he wanted to put it on the album or even release it at all. He felt like it was kind of a morbid thing to do less than a year after the disaster, but they had booked the studio for the entire week and they had finished the rest of the album by lunchtime on Thursday. These are the most productive and disciplined hippies that ever lived, in other words. So the other guys in the band were like, "Come on, Gordo, let's do your little ship song. You don't have to put it on the album if you don't want to." And they wound up working on it for a day and a half, doing God knows how many takes, and the first dry run was still the best thing they had, so that is what got released. And if you are someone who has ever toiled in the vineyard of recorded music, you know that tends to happen sometimes. Bob Dylan understands that. Sonny Boy Williamson understood that. We gotta cut that shit right now while it's hot, or it ain't gonna be worth a goddamn. If I'm being honest, that might be my favorite quote in music history. Not just because it's funny, but because it is so very correct. Sometimes when you play a thing the first time, and you think it sucks, and you think you can do it better, you are wrong. Sometimes the first one is the best one. Sometimes the song comes out the way it wants to come out, and not necessarily the way you think it should come out, and the song is right, and you are wrong. I think this week, and the Edmund Fitzgerald 50th anniversary has also shown us the best of YouTube, which I think we need to acknowledge when it happens. Because we know all too well about the worst of YouTube. When you click on something that looks like a cool history video and it's some god-awful AI-generated bullshit with some fake robot voiceover getting all the facts completely wrong. I don't know about you, but it happens to me at least once a day. When YouTube is at its best and YouTubers are at their best, they completely obviate the need for the continued existence of the mainstream legacy news media. I already hat-tipped Lore Lodge, but I also need to hat-tip Part-Time Explorer. And if you're not already subscribed to both of those channels, you need to rectify that situation, and I will drop the appropriate links in the description. But it fills me with hope for the future of the human race and the human intellect, that young men who are about the same age as my kids are doing long-form documentaries on the Edmund Fitzgerald tragedy that are just orders of magnitude superior to anything you would ever get from the regular media, or whatever we are supposed to call them now. I've been watching mainstream media documentaries on the Edmund Fitzgerald tragedy for years, 20th anniversary, 25th, 30th, 40th, and I have gained more knowledge since 3 o'clock this morning, both on the technical details of the incident and the personal details of the men who were lost, than I ever gained from all that previous mainstream media viewing. Also, it's kind of a difficult adjustment when 50th anniversaries of things start to pass, and they are things that happened in one's own lifetime, but damn it, it's an adjustment this reporter is willing to make, as I've never had any particular aspiration except to be a wise old man. Knowing what we knew in November of 1975, would there have been any way of preventing the Edmund Fitzgerald tragedy? I don't think so. As with most tragedies, at least the ones that wind up being the most instructive, it's a confluence of a whole series of factors. Ships built to structurally unsound designs because they need to be skinny enough to fit through certain river locks, shipping authorities telling them they can carry loads they shouldn't be allowed to carry, ship captains persisting in the old-timey belief that a real sailor should confront the storm and sail right through it, companies demanding that cargoes get to their destinations on time irrespective of the danger of the conditions. What was Edmund Fitzgerald's ultimate misfortune? It didn't have anything to do with the skills of her captain or her crew. She had the best captain and crew that you possibly could have had on Lake Superior in 1975. Her misfortune was to get caught up in a series of circumstances in a certain location, in a certain set of conditions that the greatest maritime planning minds in the world could not have foreseen until the exact thing happened that wound up happening. It's a regrettable component of the human condition that sometimes we don't learn things until the worst-case scenario comes to pass. By most estimates, the Great Lakes are the graveyard of between 6,000 and 10,000 ships that have gone to the bottom in the last 400 years or so. But it's been a half-century since the Edmund Fitzgerald's loss, and how many Great Lakes shipping disasters have there been since then? 0. Is it a good thing that we've learned the lessons that we needed to learn from that tragedy? Yes. Does it make a damn bit of difference to the loved ones who still mourn the 29 men who went down and remain permanently entombed on the floor of Lake Superior? To the captain who wanted to do one more run so he could pay for his wife's cancer treatment? To the first mate who delayed his retirement to make this one last run with his captain and his friend because he felt obliged to do it? To the engineer who was 2 days away from celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary at home with the love of his life? To the 20-year-old kid who was working for beer money and just wanted to start a band when he got home? No, it does not. Not even a little bit. And that is why we mourn. And that's why the lessons we learn from tragedy do not assuage our sadness. As I'm writing this script, I'm hoping I got through reading it with my dry eyes intact. But my stoicism isn't nearly as strong as it was 14 months ago, so I guess the viewer will have to be the judge of whether or not I succeeded. I am done. That's all I've got. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Godspeed to the men of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Wherever they are now, we wish them fair winds and following seas. See you next time. Get off my lawn.